It's time to say what I didn't want to say before, or was afraid to. I understood two things very early in life, things that later ruined parts of my life and built my career at the same time. The first one was this: adults like you better when you were the same as everyone else. No one ever really explains what that means. You just learn to guess. From faces, from tone, from the pause someone makes before answering you. The second thing was simpler and more useful. If you learn how to draw attention to yourself with a joke, a strange haircut, a role, a loud remark, people handle you less, not physically. I mean, they stop getting inside you. They ask fewer questions. They don't force you to explain why you're sad or angry or quiet. My father, Haywood Jones, was a man of order and routine. He disliked chaos. Evenings were quiet, a newspaper, a steady voice, no scenes. He could be kind, or more accurately, approving. But only when things followed his rules. I remember the feeling clearly. You bring something into the room, a drawing, a melody, an idea, and the first thing you do is look at his face. Not to hear, "well done," but to understand whether this is going to be awkward or whether you can relax. I learned to read that very early, and later I grew sick of constantly guessing. That's when I started pushing back, not with words, with behavior, doing things out of spite, doing things strangely, doing things provocatively, doing them in a way that couldn't be neatly filed away. My mother, Margaret, was different. She had severe mental illness, not a difficult personality, not moodiness, literally. She could lie in bed for days, not get up, not speak, stare at a single point on the wall. Then there were periods of sudden activity, anxiety, restless movement. She'd speak faster than usual and seem unable to stop. Back then, I didn't know words like depression or psychosis. I just understood one thing. Today, it's better to be quieter. Today, it's better not to interfere. A child who grows up with this doesn't become sensitive. He becomes cautious. You listen to your own footsteps. You choose your words in advance. You try not to be a problem. Because you can feel that one extra movement could ruin everything. Terry Burns, my half-brother on my mother's side, mattered to me. He was older. He brought records and books into the house. He showed me another world, another kind of conversation, another kind of freedom. But he had schizophrenia. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't cinematic madness. It looked like this. He would start a conversation and suddenly drift away. He spoke in sentences that didn't quite connect. He might look past you, not at you. He could get stuck on a single thought, repeat it, then abruptly fall silent. I watched how difficult it became for people to be around him. Not because they were bad people, because they didn't know how to react. I saw them tense up, speak more quietly, or, on the contrary, too quickly. And I learned something from that. When you become not like the others, people step back. That's why I later learned to play roles. I began inventing stage personas. Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, others. It wasn't just art, it was protection. If you're a character, no one expects a normal reaction from you. A role is a way of not answering directly. You can be sharp, cold, strange, and it gets explained as, that's just the artist. I used this consciously. It was easier than being a person who sometimes doesn't know what to say or how to behave. By 2014, I had been living in New York for many years. I had a wife, Iman, a well-known model and businesswoman, a person with a very direct character, incapable of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. And I had a daughter, Lexi. She was there during that time, Being around her was the hardest part. With her, it was most difficult to pretend that everything was okay. She looked at me not as an artist or an important father, just as a person. Sometimes I caught myself avoiding her gaze because in it there was a future without me. I loved her quietly, deeply, but I often chose to disappear into work because I honestly didn't know what to do with that fear. On the outside, life looked calm. No touring, no constant glare of stage lights. In 2013, my album, The Next Day, was released. A studio album after a long pause. It was widely discussed. It charted high. People started saying that Bowie was back. I didn't like that word. But it worked as motivation. As long as someone is bringing you back, it means you're still expected. In the summer of 2014, I was diagnosed with liver cancer. I say it directly because phrases like serious illness mean nothing. Cancer. It didn't make me wiser. It made me angry and very practical. The first thing I thought was whether I would have time to finish what I had started. That sounds selfish. It was. I measured myself by what I made and how much time I had left to make it. The illness threatened that directly. Physically, it wasn't like in movies. It was made up of specific details. Morning nausea, sometimes a metallic taste in my mouth, rapid exhaustion. Not artist fatigue, the kind where you climb a flight of stairs and suddenly realize your breathing has shortened. It infuriated me. I didn't want my body setting the rules. I had spent my entire life making sure I was the one who did that. And here's something important. I hid the diagnosis. I told only my family and the narrowest circle. Most people around me didn't know. Not out of nobility, out of control. I didn't want people to treat me like someone already sentenced. That moment when you're mentally placed at the end of the line. I didn't want to see in their eyes the expression I had seen around my brother Terry. Tense, sympathetic, retreating. I wanted to remain the one who leads, even if it was a lie. With Iman, I behaved worse than I like to admit. She asked directly, "How are you feeling?" And sometimes I answered sharply, almost rudely. I could say I'm fine in a way that clearly meant leave me alone. I could go into a room, close the door. I could turn the music up loud to avoid talking. I knew I was leaving her alone with hopelessness and emptiness. And I did it anyway, because an honest answer would have meant admitting that I was weak and scared. And I didn't want to be weak, even at home. The song Blackstar didn't begin as a final song. It started with a feeling. I needed a sound that could hold two things at once, order and chaos. I wanted the first part to move confidently, almost mechanically, and then for everything to fall apart, as if you suddenly realize the ground under your feet isn't as solid as it seemed a moment ago. We recorded the album Blackstar in New York. From January to May of 2015, at the Magic Shop and Human Worldwide. Ordinary studios, control rooms, glass, microphones, cables, the smell of equipment, and exhaustion. I worked with producer Tony Viconti, a man who had been with me for many years. He had seen me from every angle, including the least flattering ones. He treated me without reverence. If he didn't like something, he said so directly. Sometimes he stayed silent, looking through the control room glass. That silence was enough for me to understand that something wasn't working. I assembled the musicians from the New York scene. Donnie McCaslin, saxophonist, bandleader, calm, stubborn. He came into the studio without unnecessary words, coffee in hand, a quiet nod, straight to the instrument. He treated me professionally. Show me the material. I'll do the job. I felt conflicted toward him. I liked that he didn't bow. And at the same time, it irritated me that he wasn't afraid of me. Mark Giliana, the drummer, very physical, very focused. He sat at the kit as if ready to strike at any moment. He rarely smiled, didn't try to be convenient. Sometimes his rhythm sounded like an argument with me. Tim Lefebvre, the bassist, quiet, stubborn. He could stand by the wall, listening for a long time, then say one short sentence. And suddenly, it was clear what needed to change. Jason Lindner, the keyboardist. He looked relaxed, but he was intensely attentive. He spoke rarely. But when he did, his suggestions shifted the entire mood. They entered the studio as living people, not as a list of names. Donnie would start running a fragment while others were still laying cables. Mark tapped the sticks against his knees, checking the rhythm. Tim listened with his eyes closed. Jason stayed silent for a long time, then suddenly offered a move that flipped the song. What matters is this: they didn't know I was sick. They read my withdrawal and sharpness as secrecy and high demands. Meanwhile, I was conserving energy, pretending this was just another job. That's what using people looks like. I didn't want anyone to know about my condition. I didn't want them to treat me differently. I brought sketches of Blackstar into the studio. Fragments of melodies, lines, a sense of structure. We started playing. And I listened not for beauty. I listened for discomfort, where my breathing broke, where tension appeared inside, where it's uncomfortable. That's where the truth is. The first part of the song needed to feel like footsteps in a hallway at night. Even, confident, with the sense that someone is behind a door. Then everything had to break, become almost light, but not joyful. As if you convinced yourself for a moment that you could still live normally, and then it crashes back over you. It wasn't easy. There were days I came into the studio already irritated, not because the musicians were bad, because I felt bad. You try to sing, your breath is short. You try to hold a phrase, nausea rises. You try to look composed, because you've spent your life being composed. At some point, you start resenting people simply because they're healthy. It's an ugly thought. But it was there. I never said it out loud. I just became unbearable. I remember one specific action I'm ashamed of. Something that can't be justified by art. Spring of 2015, one long recording day. We had been struggling with the song for hours. Everyone was tired. Donnie suggested stopping. Continuing the next day. It was reasonable. I felt weak. A metallic taste in my mouth, cold in my hands, a heavy head. I understood that I needed to stop, and I still said, no, one more. Not because I believed in the result, because I didn't want anyone else deciding where the line was. I wanted to place the final point. I saw Mark rub his face, stop tapping the sticks. I saw Tim stop meeting my eyes. I saw Jason stay silent for too long. I knew I was breaking trust. And I kept going. That was the moment I consciously crossed a boundary. Choosing power over people instead of respect. I understood the consequences, and I went on anyway. When the take turned out usable, I felt satisfaction, not joy. Satisfaction that the room had once again adjusted itself to me. It isn't pretty, and I won't justify it. The meaning I put into this song is simple and uncomfortable. You can be famous, wealthy, intelligent, and still have a place inside you that you do not control. It might be fear, illness, guilt, the past, and the harder you pretend that everything is fine, the more that place begins to command you from within. I wanted Blackstar to sound like a person trying to keep his face together after it has already cracked. There was another thing I wanted to say, something people rarely admit. I was not always honest with my audience. I understood how intrigue works. I knew people would dissect the song, search for meanings, argue, build theories. I used that. It was manipulation of attention, not necessarily cruel, but deliberate. I built the song so it wouldn't close, so it could keep living as a riddle. And yes, I like that feeling of power. When people spend years discussing what you left them as bait, at the time, I couldn't honestly admit that there was cowardice in this. It was easier to hide direct words inside structure and symbols than to say at home, "I'm scared." It was easier to make a strange song than to sit with Iman and hold her gaze when she asked, "Are you dying?" I escaped into work. It wasn't flattering. It was flight. The video for Blackstar was directed by Johan Renck. We shot it in Brooklyn in September 2015. He wasn't just a hired director. He was someone who could make things strange without explaining them. He treated me as an author, not a monument. That gave me space. I brought ideas, details meant to lock the viewer's gaze. And here's something I say without pride. It mattered to me that there was something in the frame you couldn't look away from, even if it was crude, even if the reason was simple. Because until the very end, I wanted to control where the public looked. There are things I couldn't say then, and they can't be fixed now. I couldn't tell the musicians, "I'm sick, this is hard for me." I preferred that they think, "He's just difficult." It was easier for me that way. It was also cruel, because they didn't get to choose whether they wanted to work under those conditions. I took that choice away from them. I couldn't tell Iman, "Sometimes I hate when you ask me about this," because the question forced me out of the role. I could snap, be harsh, pretend to be busy, and I know I hurt her, not accidentally. With my coldness, I couldn't tell myself a simple thing. You're afraid of being an ordinary, weak person. I had been afraid of that my whole life, since childhood, with Terry, with my mother. The illness just shoved my face into it. Here you go. You'll become exactly who you were afraid of becoming. Someone people step back from. And I started fighting, not the cancer, but the very idea that someone might see me without control. On January 8th, 2016, the album Blackstar was released with the song of the same name. It came out on my birthday. 2 days later, I died. People would later call it a perfect final gesture. I want to spit at that word, because perfect means clean. And this wasn't clean. There was anger, calculation, using people, fear. I didn't turn into a saint just because I got sick. I don't want to end with comfort. I don't want to write, "I understood everything." I didn't. I still don't know where honesty ends and the habit of control begins in Blackstar. I still don't know whether, if I had more time, I would have become softer. It's possible I would have become even more controlling. It's possible I would have made another manipulative song, so people would keep looking where I wanted them to look, instead of where I was afraid. I remember the studio not as a place of inspiration. I remember the smell of the control room. I remember the dryness in my mouth. I remember the moment when Donnie suggested stopping, and the panic I felt at the thought that someone else might decide where to put the period. And I said no, not because I was a genius, because until the very end, I was terrified of being the one people say, "That's enough," to.